quick, sorry to interrupt you, but when Jordan said that this documentary is going to make a lot of people think I was a really mean guy, this is absolutely what he had to be alluding to, because it was a heavy avalanche pile on to Jerry Krause. And because to your point, he's not there to defend himself. So it's almost a bad look that you're putting so much slander into a documentary, which is clearly one-sided. From what we saw in the first two episodes, that could change. We may get a story in a little bit, but now you see what he's talking about, trying to get out in front of it, that, you know, maybe even for me, and I know I'm an asshole, maybe I was being an asshole.
Justin Fan. Oh my God, there's so much to unpack in everything Wob and Matt Moore just said. Justin Fan.
Yeah, briefly before we get into all that unpacking, I just thought it was wildly entertaining, all the new stuff that came out, the Bulls traveling cocaine circus, the backstory on Pippen growing up with his father and his brother. That was awesome. And we got just a bunch of people catching strays, like Walt Frazier, his quote about MJ not being 7 foot. We got Rick Carlisle, he wants his mommy, and Jalen Brunson's on Twitter now, giving him slack for it. We got the Blazers catching one for drafting Sam Bowie over MJ. We got Scott Burrell making a quick cameo saying, he wants a hug, and MJ just shading him. There's so many like cool things and nuances that came out on this that, I just never heard of. And the Pippen story about him starting as an equipment manager at his college and then working his way up, that's just an incredible story. Wow, there's just so much to unpack here, and just a highly enjoyable 2 hours, and even better than NBA playoffs. Like, that hit a spot for me. I grew up on Jordan, and that was just better, if same as having just NBA playoffs in my life again.
Dude, I will tell you, you just hit on 4 things that I wrote down immediately when I was watching the episodes. The Scott Burrell thing and the way Jordan looked at him. The Scottie Pippen, I just did not remember. I was in Highland Park, which is where Jordan lived in the 80s, when he was playing for the Bulls, when they drafted Scottie Pippen. They worked out at the Multiplex, which was the gym 10 minutes from my house, where when the Bulls were done, we'd all play basketball on that court. And I had forgotten how tragic Scottie Pippen's life was and how challenging his life was. The he needs his mommy quote, that was just awesome. And that was phenomenal. I loved that. All that was amazing. Like, some of that behind the scenes stuff is just, it's pure gold. And it's what's making this, Rob, to your point about sort of the production value, and Matt, you wisely brought in Ramona Shelburne's story about how this came together, and going back 4 years now when they were putting this together. Some of these things, and dude, Michael Jordan knocking on a hotel room and being so candid about lines over here, guys doing weed here, and girls over here. That's what I think is so interesting about this, Wob, and to unpack what you're saying about Jordan being an asshole.
Yeah, I
don't think it's about Jerry Krause. I think it's Michael has cultivated this image for 30-something years now about being a shining, happy endorsement for a way of clean living and sort of popularity. And what you're seeing is Jordan being a dick, and Jordan telling Scott Burrell he doesn't want to give him a hug and doesn't want to joke around because they won some exhibition championship, and Jordan giving teammates a hard time in ways that you've always heard about it, but it was always couched as Michael is so competitive, this is what he does. Even when he punched Steve Kerr in the face, it wasn't Michael Jordan's an asshole. That's how competitive he is in practice. The Burrell thing to me is like him being an asshole, and Krause is him being an asshole. Like, there are these elements where he just doesn't seem like the sort of the visage that he has presented is not what he is presenting in this movie. That's what I think people think that's what I think he means when he says people aren't going to like me as much.
Okay, so 3 things. First of all, the cocaine scene when they brought it up, the cocaine circus, the laugh that he had, it was like the first time, I think that was genuine, that he had never heard it before, and that was such like a who snitched laugh. Like, he was like kind of like, oh man, that's so funny, but in the back of his mind, he's like, I got some phone calls to make, figure out who snitched about that hotel room. that to me, I was like, oh my god, like, he was generally taken back by that. And it was nice to see that moment of like, even Jordan doesn't know all, it being Michael Jordan. Number 2 was Charles Oakley. That's that footage from the not the locker room, but looked like where they do the X's and O's in the film room. Him just like casually taking Scottie Pippen by the collar and just royal rumbling him around the room and then smacking him. He's like, no, you're a rookie in here. The epitome of Charles Oakley, and why Knicks fans, being a 90s Knicks fan, why we fell in love with Charles, because he was not only the enforcer, but he was the pledge master. And the fact that Pippen and Jordan, we're talking about Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, had the level of respect and allowed him to do that. It's the equivalent of hanging a fresh ribeye in front of a pit bull and it not attacking you and just waving its tail. It's the only time only one person can pull that off. And then third for me was the Scottie Pippen contract. Like, the big deal is made about it because, well, he signed it and it ended up being a bad deal. But I'm totally on Team Reinsdorf there because, dude, you signed it. And then he even said it, don't come back to me ever after you sign a contract. I'm totally cool with that way of business, because if you wanted to bet on yourself a little bit, you should have taken a shorter deal and then we could have extended you after that. Pippen gave you a genuine reason as to why he could not do that, because of where he grew up, his family commitments and life and responsibilities and all that. So it was just one of those situations that ethics. It's like, clearly he's worth more. Should we pay him more? And they could have paid him more and kept everybody happy. Because if you keep Pippen happy, then there's not that resentment between Jordan and Krause. They're not calling him crumbs on the bus because crumbs are always all over his shirt. He's not making diet pills jokes. And you have to wonder if ethics got in the way of this dynasty running through the 2000s. I mean, that's a question. I don't know how much longer they had, but that one, you can point to the Scottie Pippen contract, I think, is the pivotal moment in this is it.
I would love to see what a Rich Paul would do with that contract if back then. I imagine it like the Jimmy Butler gif where he's just ripping the piece of paper and throwing it behind him. I mean, that's crazy. And we talked about the traveling cocaine circuits earlier. I thought it was funny that they portrayed Mike as like the wholesome guy who was cleaning his kitchen, doing his laundry, folding his clothes, drinking OJ and 7-Up. That was kind of a funny juxtaposition. Another kind of thing that I thought was funny too is they kind of tied it in the whole load management thing that had existed back then, and them keeping Jordan to 7 minutes and a half, and then Jordan getting really, really upset about it, saying, Stan, F these guys, man. And, when he's on the bench, and where we kind of saw when we heard that rift in his second season just kind of initially happened because they stuck so hard to that 13, 14-minute limit.
It wasn't just load management, though. It was also tanking. And you heard them talking about sort of playing for draft position. And again, like, what was interesting about the old footage, and I do have quibbles, like, as much as a sort of Jordan and Chicago obsessive as I am, I do have some quibbles with the movie, but with the first 2 episodes. That comment, a reporter asked Jordan about tanking, and he was so livid and so angry. Like, I had forgotten tanking was something anyone had talked about before, the Sixers, and load management was something that existed before the Spurs started doing it. Like, that to me, Matt Moore, was some of the more interesting stuff, just little nuanced context, things like that.
So there's a lot of things that you pick up when you go through this that kind of carry through from the doc through today's stuff. So like one of them is the load management stuff and how that stuff's still going on. It's funny that for a while, no longer, but it's funny for a while, Kawhi was actually a Jordan brand guy. That's actually kind of funny considering he's the king of load management. The other thing is, look, so we've got this line from Reinsdorf saying, players don't win championships. And he was trying to correct the record in another interview, players and coaches and the organization win championships. That's all stuff that Joe Lacob has intimated before with their entire approach with the Warriors. And the whole idea that Reinsdorf gets to at the end of the second episode with Pippen's contract, the whole concept that they're talking about in terms of, well, we can't just when Krause is like, I have to stay aggressive. I'm always going to stay aggressive. I'm always shopping these guys. Guess what? That's the precursor to light years ahead. That's what where that comes from is, I don't care how good we are. You're on the downside. We're going to try and get ahead of it. And when we talk about the idea, because that was one of Reinsdorf's things there, right? Is, look, I'm paying Jordan more money than anybody else has ever been paid in the history of the game. I'm going to have to pay Pippen all of this money for all of this time. These guys are old. They're getting over the hill. I don't want to have to pay for a team on decline. That's what the Patriots have done. That's how the Patriots built a dynasty, was getting ahead of, doesn't matter how much we care about you. We're going to let you go. If we think that you're no longer at the top, we're going to let you go. And it never ends well in those situations. And we always think, like, why would you possibly break those teams up? And yet it always kind of happens. Like, that's how it goes. And I'll bet you Draymond Green's going to be gone from the Warriors eventually at some point. So there are all these kind of connections along the way that you can see the lineage of. Like, John Paxson is there being interviewed as a former player, but he's also talking about, like, the good things that Jerry Krause did, because Jerry Krause stood up and did a lot of the things that Reinsdorf wanted him to do. Guess what John Paxson has done during his entire tenure with the Bulls organization? He's taking care of what Reinsdorf wanted him to do.
Okay, so this first 2 episodes of this, just to piggyback on the point you were making there with Draymond Green, the Warriors light years ahead, how damn difficult it is to maintain you can have championship years, you can be a championship team, but we're talking dynasty here. Dynasty, to maintain a dynasty, what it takes to do so, not just the players, not just winning on the basketball court, but most importantly, egos and contracts. How you are able to contain that for more than, let's say, 4-5 years is the difference between the 90s Bulls and the Showtime Lakers and all the great dynasties throughout time versus those teams that just win the one championship and then fade away. Keeping a team together after watching this is freaking impossible, because to win that many titles, the players are going to start to think that they are superhuman. And so is the coach. And so is the front office for putting it together. And at some point, it's just going to break. There's just too many chefs in the kitchen, right? So watching the Roman Empire of basketball crumble here was humanizing to watch a little bit. But you also have to respect the fact that they were able to do this six times with these personalities. Every single one of them, it's like blood that does not match. So maybe that just proves how good they were at basketball, the game itself, that they put that above the rest. But also, on the contrary, they could have had another 3 years of this if egos and contracts didn't get in the way. So maybe that's one of the bigger what ifs throughout time.
Yeah, but the thing there is, it starts with Phil Jackson and Jerry Krause. Like, why does Jerry Krause say to Phil Jackson, we're giving you 1 more year, that's it? If he doesn't say that, then so many of these other things don't become an issue. Michael Jordan is not bitter that last year. Maybe they do sign Scottie Pippen to a 2-year, $20 million deal. What did he end up signing with Portland when he went to Portland, right? Like, it wasn't a 10-year deal for $100 million. Right. He signed a short-term deal that was just 5 or 6x what he had been getting paid by the Bulls. Like, you're right, Wob. You could have kept this thing together, but it came down to Jerry Krause treating Phil Jackson like an asshole.
Well, I'll say this too.
One of the problems is how overt Krause was about it, and how public and how kind of a hard stance he was about. Like, he said, if you go 82-0, we're still not bringing you back. And that is just an extreme line in the sand to draw. And that just fueled all this open resentment we saw in the documentary from Jordan, where he's making these comments, straight to Krause, and he's saying, so those are pills you take to keep you short, or are those diet pills? And he's talking about, like, are you kind of come take layups with us when you lower the rim? And then we heard at the end where Pippen was in the bus just cursing him out from the back. So, I mean, that just added fuel to the fire, where he was just so overt about it and so hard line about it being the last year no matter what.
I think I do want to point this out, though, because Jackson's always been really good at being able to, like, part of this is you have Jordan and Jackson, who are 2 of the most iconic figures in NBA history. They're also 2 of the most iconic figures in NBA history in terms of manipulating the media. So, like, if we say, like, well, Phil Jackson didn't do anything wrong here, like, Phil's just, like, wanting everybody to get along. And yet we saw Phil have trouble twice in LA. Like, Phil Jackson is not the person that is, like, construed as, like, he's just an easygoing guy that everyone loves. That is not how his career has shown to be played out. Like, there are dynamics that go on here, which is not to say that I don't think Krause deserves any of the blame. Just as the reality is, like, Jerry Krause, you go back and you read all the books, he's unlikable. Like, he's just an obnoxious human being. But that also doesn't mean that he was wrong. And it also doesn't mean we get back to the end of that second episode, or the Jordan episode rather, where he's mad about the 14 seconds, right? He's mad about missing the playoffs and pulling him and tanking. If they don't get the kind of support that they need, does Jordan wind up asking out of Chicago? Because he's gone up and completely been unable to win. If they don't land Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant, who, by the way, did not get enough recognition, I think, even in these first 2 episodes, Horace Grant needs to get mentioned more going forward in the series. Like, do they wind up winning enough for Jordan not to do what all superstars do, which is, hey, I want out? Like, Pippen wound up being like, I want out. Like, everyone winds up getting there, especially if Jordan is rising to that point, but he's not winning championships, then what happens? So a lot of this gets back to, like, Krause is doing what he's got to do in order to try and get the help for Jordan that he needed, because that team wasn't good enough. Those Doug Collins teams simply weren't good enough.
The Krause thing is obviously going to be a massive storyline throughout this. And again, going back to, I had forgotten in some ways how candid Jordan was. He had a comment, early on in one of the pressers after they had won their 5th title, where all of it, David Aldridge, you can hear his voice asking about sort of the situation already for next year before the confetti has even been wiped from Jordan's face. He's getting asked about what's going to happen between championship 5 and 6. And he said, I shouldn't have to be put in a position to have to choose another coach.
Yeah.
Well, Matt Moore, you're saying Phil isn't as good of a guy or was able to manipulate media or however it was. What do you think he was doing behind the scenes that made it untenable, that would make Jerry Krause, who clearly, for all of his good things, had these faults where he did feel like he had to take a stand and be the tough guy and prove that he was the boss all the time. What do you think Phil Jackson was doing behind the scenes?
I don't know. I mean, that's the answer. I don't know. What I will say is, like, I know that Jackson was aware of his own prowess. Like, he was aware of how good he was, and he was also aware of how successful the Bulls were. And he was also, like, he had to get his contract renegotiated as well during this entire stint too. That's covered in Playing for Keeps by David Halberstam, and I'm assuming the doc will get into that stuff here down the line. Like, they had to get Jordan squared away. They had to get Jackson, and then they had to get Jordan, and then they had to get Pippen to finally deal with his stuff. So, like, all of these guys wanted their cut, which all of this comes back to the fact, again, that Jerry Reinsdorf doesn't, you're going to have to squeeze blood from stone when it comes to Jerry Reinsdorf. I think that clearly, like Justin was saying, Justin's point was a really good one, that Krause continuously pushed things into the open and made them obvious, and he had no subtlety or tact with it. Like, he was a baseball scout that got elevated to this position. He was not Pat Riley. He was not smooth. He wasn't a former player. He had no way to navigate these kinds of waters, and that showed. And that is why I think that they all piled on him. But I do think it's notable that you never hear players actually going after an owner. Like, it's never going to happen, because those are basically the bosses. Like, even nowadays, you do not hear that stuff unless it's a situation like Sterling. Players still won't talk about Dolan. Like, they still won't talk about Dolan, even with his ineptitude. So I think Krause wound up taking a lot of the beating in those situations. And I do think that Jordan was fiercely loyal to Jackson, because Jackson helped him satiate that insane desire to win. My question is, like, Justin brought up the whole thing about him when he was younger, being like drinking orange juice and ironing his clothes. And that's real. Like, some people talked about that. But I think it was somebody mentioned this today on Twitter, that the first time they interviewed him, he was ironing, and he was like, "Oh, I always do that." And then the next thing was like, "Oh, hey, Dean Williams, how are you doing? Do you want to talk to Coach Roy Smith?" Like, all these things were like randomly popping up during this interview, because Jordan cultivated these things. I will bet you, based off of a story that I have coming out tomorrow, which is a collection of all the gambling stories from Jordan's life that have been collected through whatever various record, that Jordan was not drinking orange juice, taking his vitamins, and saying his prayers. That while his teammates may have been doing cocaine, I think Jordan was probably playing cards, specifically Tonks, with some teammates or friends somewhere.
Yeah, kind of wrapping up the Krause thing, I think Steve Kerr really said it best with his quote on Krause. He said, Jerry Krause deserves a lot of credit, but he couldn't get out of his own way. I think that pretty much nailed it, because, I mean, Krause is getting a lot of shit on this documentary, probably a little bit more than he deserves. And there was a little bit of a section that highlighted how good he was in terms of surrounding Jordan with the right pieces and making the right moves, like trading for Scottie Pippen. He dealt Olden Polynice and future draft considerations. That was a really great move, obviously. He did a lot of the right things, but in the end, him taking such a hard line and wanting kind of his share of the credit, more so, and not realizing that this is a player-driven league. Something that is so obvious in this day and age to all front offices and owners is it's a player-driven league. You need one of 7 players in the league to even contend for a title in the league these days. And for Krause not to realize that, for him to just think that, okay, I'll be fine, moving on, rebuilding without Phil, without MJ, without Scottie Pippen, and just kind of not understanding the bigger picture and how to play things tactfully and just being so overt and out front and inflammatory about it. That's what kind of rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and that's why he's getting piled on right now.
Well, before the disses started, before the diet pills thing started, let's not forget that the tension between Pippen, Krause, Jordan, that triangle there maybe it didn't start, but it reached its first peak back during the Dream Team when Krause was hell-bent on getting Tony Kukoc to play for the Chicago Bulls. And that's why they came out with their Doberman defense in the first Dream Team, the first Croatia game, because Krause was just like, this is my guy. He's going to be the man that I scouted, that I found. He's going to be the team after you guys leave. He championed him as the savior of the Chicago Bulls, even before he came to play. It was a second-round pick that took years to come. So while the Bulls were busy winning championships behind Jordan and Pippen, Krause was kind of like, you know what? I've already put you on the back burner. We've already accomplished everything. We're playing with house money. My guy is now Kukoc. And that was in 1992. So what we watched tonight with all of those, this being the last dance, 1997, there's 5 years of simmering happening there for a multitude of reasons. And granted, Scottie Pippen's contract had not changed during either of those time frames. But when you have 5 years of winning championships, being the 2 best players on the team, and your management, the guy who's responsible for putting the pieces together, is just looking past you to bring in some European guy that we blew out by 40 in the Olympic team, you can see why the disses started, right? You can see why it boiled over, because clearly you don't care about the way we feel. That's probably what they thought.
Yes, some context on that whole thing from the Dream Team documentary. One of my favorite parts of that Dream Team documentary, Jordan's quote was something in the line of, it's like you have your own children and you see a child over there that you love better. And that's how he was describing the whole situation with Krause's infatuation, his love with Tony Kukoc. And, his quote, I think Jordan's quote was, we weren't going out there playing Tony Kukoc. We were going out there playing Jerry Krause in a Croatian jersey. And that's kind of how, just some background on that whole, situation.
I had forgotten, just how elegant a player Scottie Pippen was. Yeah. And the way he could move through a crowd and all of a sudden just appear above the rim to put back a rebound. That's what made that team so dynamic. And, even though it was a team that was not a huge three-point shooting team, obviously it was sort of within the standard of the day. I would have loved to have seen Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen against any combination of any duo playing in the NBA right now, their peak versus any other peak. Is there a peak duo playing today that can match Pippen and Jordan?
LeBron and AD.
Who matches up on who in that?
They got no chance. Pippen's going to obliterate AD. He's going to obliterate AD.
I think Pippen could play AD in the post.
He could. 100%.
And forget about Michael versus LeBron. I love them both. Obviously, I am going to be biased towards Michael, and I don't want this to turn into a Michael versus LeBron debate. But there is a ferocity and a viciousness that I think Michael has on the court. Even if LeBron is a much bigger, stronger athlete, give me Pippen and Jordan in a LeBron.
I think 2011, 2012, LeBron, Dwayne Wade might have a chance. They might have a chance, but it's going to be tough because Pippen's guarding LeBron in that situation. Like that was one of the things that stood out to me when I was watching the doc tonight was just through, now seeing it and thinking of it through the lens of like today's game, was seeing Pippen, make a standing entry pass to the no look inside, and then watching him drain the three from the outside, and then watching him just like absolutely glide over dudes for the one handed just reach up dunk. The power, the effortlessness, but also the skill and like the soundness of every single thing that he did. He was such a smart player. It was like if you combined Andre Iguodala at his peak athleticism with like Klay Thompson's skill set, not as good of a shooter, but still great. And like this amalgam, Pippen could do so many things at such an elite level. And honestly, he's one that everyone always kind of, wondered in his prime, what does he look like on his own team? And obviously those years when Jordan left were a mess in a lot of ways. But I also just think like in today's game, if you put Scottie Pippen with 4 shooters around him, what does that look like? Like these are all, I think, really fascinating questions. How does Giannis Antetokounmpo versus Scottie Pippen look is a really great question.
That is a good matchup. But he was just like, I loved the guy. I loved watching him play, what he could do with the basketball, like because he was so big, it actually ended up being the perfect complement. And I feel like he's going to come out, and we talked about this a little bit in the beginning, and we haven't sort of dived deep yet. He's going to come out looking like this really epically tragic figure because of the position that he was in, because he made $18 million over 7 years. $18 million. I mean, that's a 1-year deal for a mid-level player in the NBA, and he's a top 50 player. That is going to be a crushing narrative over the course of the next 8 episodes of this series.
Well, that's one where if I fault anything for Krause, it's being Reinsdorf's henchman too much, because like at some level you just need to be like, I know that, because Wab was talking about the whole idea of like, no, you signed your contract, go on. But I think in Pippen's case, when you realize where he came from and you understand the circumstances and how scared he was to be able to provide his family with any sort of long-term financial stability and what that means to people that come from that kind of poverty, like that's one where you just got to be like, oh, you are the greatest second player of all time. We have won so many championships with you. Like no one is, this is a case where you were absolutely, like there has to be exceptions to the rules. And like both Krause for not standing up for him and Reinsdorf for not listening to his pleas, like that is objectively wrong. Like it's just objectively wrong to manipulate the rules like that. Jay Adonde, who was in the doc and covered those Bulls teams, has been talking about this on Twitter tonight about how one thing that happened during that time period was the CBAs kept going through and the union wasn't as strong, and the league kept working to make contracts shorter and shorter and to take more power away from the players and all of these things. And Pippen kept being basically hurt by all the changes that would come to the contracts and about how everything would later shift. And you really see, the damage that was done. But I think in every single way, I blame Jerry Reinsdorf for not just being like, no, like you've made me the most successful sports owner in America. Here, let me take care of you, Scottie Pippen. Like, come on, man. That's pretty basic. I get it's business, but there's got to be a limit.
Wow, you're taking a hard line there.
Well, no, and I don't want to suggest tampering by any means, but to Matt's point, if you see your second star player is that upset, right? Because this is strictly a money thing. I'm underpaid. How does Reinsdorf not find a legal way to like give him a sponsorship of some kind? Like hook him up with another company. I'm not even talking about leaving a duffel bag under the table for him and being like, oops, if you run into, let's say, $20 million cash, everything's cool, right? Not saying that should have happened, nor did it happen, but we're talking about there was a tweet I saw earlier about the most favorable, popular franchises in all of professional sports. That includes football, soccer, you name it. And it came out with like net likability. Chicago Bulls were the only team above the 2000-2001 Los Angeles Lakers. So your global impact in terms of making money, you're telling me keeping Pippen happy for an extra $10 million out of your pocket, that would equal $100 million in another 2 years of this dynasty continuing. It's more of a math equation. And Reinsdorf's a smart dude. He didn't get to that position by just pure luck. So it makes me think that there either had to be something more there, because if this is truly just about money, there had to be a way to pay that man. There had to be a way to hook him up with they had commercials in 1997, 1998. There was technology available. I understand there wasn't the shoe deals. There wasn't $1 million for an Instagram post, but there was ways to pay the man. So there had to be something more, which we either don't know about yet or will ever, because it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I just feel bad for Scotty, man. Like he was left in a position where the only thing he can do to exert some sort of leverage is to delay his surgery and take that summer for himself off. And man, like you consider all that he's been through. We talked about it already with his father, his brother, you know, working his way up from an equipment manager. I mean, just a rough spot for Scotty. And it's good that they gave a good section of the second part to kind of highlight him, and Jordan, you know, lofted his praise on him accordingly. And we can bring up now, you know, Jordan's claim, Matt, that Scottie Pippen was the best teammate of all time. What are your thoughts on that?
So I thought it was great because there's actually been a pretty good documented record that Jordan, he would say supportive things about Scottie, and he would always like acknowledge the kind of things, but he never really conveyed real emotion about it. And so it was cool to see in this documentary, it felt like he really gave him his due. One thing that you pick up when you go back and you read the stuff like Halberstam's book or the Jordan rules, Jordan gave Scottie the treatment that he gave all those other players when Scottie came in. Like he tried to really break down Scottie to build him back up again. And so for Pippen to have gotten through all that is a testament to his toughness and how like where he comes from is stronger than all of Jordan's like nonsensical bullying stuff. But for Jordan to actually make that comment and to really commit to being like, this needs to be known is important, because in previous, it was always like, a lot of it was that Jordan always gave it that very veneer of the spokesman, like the Hanes commercial dude, the smile and like, Scotty's great. He's been so great, a phenomenal teammate. But he never really conveyed like the emotion of that's a guy that I went to war with, that stood up for me, that helped me up, that always like that helped carry me when I had bad games. Like he was there for me. And to see that conveyed by Jordan was really gratifying for somebody that loved Pippen way more than I love Jordan.
Real quick, I know we all want to feel bad for Scottie Pippen because we feel like he took a contract that was less than his value and it was significant. The man made more money in his playing career than Michael Jordan. He played more years. Yeah. That's the answer to it. But let's not act like he was just playing for crumbs, because he got paid. He got his money. So let's not feel bad for him. But we can understand his situation. And for him to use, to Justin's point, to use the ankle as leverage in almost a contract here when the whole thing was going to fall apart. I mean, at that point, the bridges have been burned. There is no explanation for it. And the only one I can think of is Reinsdorf was protecting Krause in his vision. That's the only thing I can come out with here as to why Reinsdorf did not make it right with the players. But that doesn't make sense either.
So I got one for you. This is from David Halberstam's Playing for Keeps real quick. The fact that there is an explosive quality to much of what Krause did not seem to bother Reinsdorf at all. If anything, the owner might, in his own contrarian way, not be that unhappy that Krause left so much human wreckage behind. It meant that agents, players, and media people were almost always exhausted by the time that Reinsdorf entered the battlefield.
I'd like to look up Scottie Pippen's career earnings. What were his career earnings?
I don't have the exact number. I think it was 10.
We need Darren to parachute into this conversation.
Yeah. It's close, but the man made more money playing under contract.
It was $109 million were his career earnings.
He made $109 million. How many did he play after he left the Bulls? What, did he end up playing 10 more years?
May I introduce you to the Portland Trailblazers?
Yeah, right.
7 years. He made like 38 million in 2 years with the Blazers at the end of that contract.
Yeah, he made 11 with the Rockets, 15 with the Blazers in the first year, 14 in the second, 18 in 2002, and 19.7 million in 2003 when
But
when
at
he
that
was
point,
not a spring chicken.
At that point, he did not know that's how his career was going to end up. I thought it was really fascinating for Phil Jackson, and maybe this is 2020, but the way he framed how he was okay with what Scotty was doing because he understood that's how Scotty was able to exert leverage. And ultimately, he was going to get a stronger Scotty back for the second half run as they were going to try to win the playoffs and the finals than trying to force Scotty into anything that was going to put him in a bad spot mentally as well as physically. Like, I thought that was a fascinating look at sort of how Phil Jackson managed players and how he could give a shit about Jerry Krause or anybody sticking it to management.
And aside, kind of looking at MJ, we talked about Pippen making more money than MJ. 13 out of MJ's 15 years in the NBA, he made $4 million or less. He had 2 years where he made $63 million total, which accounted for like 63 of the 93 that he made. And the rest, the 13, the other 15, he made $4 million or less. Crazy.
And I bet the taxes in Oregon are a lot less than they were in the state of Illinois.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let me nitpick some things. This documentary, and listen, I loved it. And, you know, with the early Chicago stuff, you know, I was sitting there with my wife and my 13-year-old and talking about some of these games that I was at and having a Michael Jordan, A Star Is Born poster from that SI. Some of those things were amazing, that old school stuff. But it was pretty light on behind the scenes for me. And I felt pretty underwhelmed by what they showed. There was maybe a couple of good practice scenes, but they've been hyping up the idea that this is going to be one of those things that is built on a season-long sort of behind-the-scenes footage. And I get what they're doing in the first couple episodes, but I felt so far what I'm getting is a lot of tunnel interviews, a lot of local interviews, a lot of Sports Center clips. Like, I thought it was all candy, but I'm a little ready to see more season-long behind closed door stuff.
I think they need to set up the characters first. So we have 10 episodes here. Next week is Rodman. It's Pippen, Jordan, Rodman, Kerr. I bet they'll knock out like Kerr and Rodman in an episode. And then they eventually have to simulate the season for us. And they're going to go through the entirety. We haven't even gotten to the damn Jazz yet. Wait till the Jazz experience the wrath of this documentary. I imagine they're going to be in the locker rooms for all of that pregame, postgame tunnel. They only have 10 hours to show us. And they had, when I spoke with Jason, it was like 225 hours to cut through of like footage that in the NBA archives. And you have to narrow that down to 5%. So that's 5% total, which means only 1% dedicated to actual archived footage. Everything else is the interviews and the commercials and things like that. So we're going to get there, but they also need to keep that balance there and have the players be put on these platforms before they explain the season of why this was the last dance. You know, we know these players on the surface, but they're going to keep chipping away there, telling you the stories so that what you see at the end of the documentary will mean more in the locker room. Just a personal opinion.
Yeah. Are you looking for more like Jordan with his teammates and how we got a little bit of that with like Bill Cartwright, early on. And we know all these stories with Kerr and the black popped in the face, him like ruining Rodney McRae just verbally, and him just like basically dropping out of the league after that, and how he supposedly ruined Muggsy Bogues' shot. Like, I want to see a little bit more of that side of NBA. Yeah, and Kukoc, yeah.
He hated Kukoc because of all the stuff that Wob talked about. Like, they were on him the whole season. So yeah, there should be I agree with Chad. Like, there should be more, I think, meat to it. Like, you had like him signing the kid's autograph and walking through, and it's like, I don't need stuff of Jordan. This is one of the biggest things. I don't need to see footage of Jordan in front of people because he immediately adopted a persona that was not reflective of the actual human being he was. Like, if you're going to show this, I want to see the person that showed up at the Hall of Fame ceremony that dedicated the last major speech of his career to all of the people that he destroyed. Like, I want to see an actual... a closer version of the real Michael Jordan, the dude that cheated and welched on bets. Like, that's the dude that I want to see, because I'll tell you, doing the story and all his gambling, it is not the guy in the Hanes commercials.
Okay, well, you saw that in the Danny Ainge.
Yep.
When he's down on the putter when they're playing golf. He's down on the putter, holding it by the shaft, not even the grip. He's like bent all the way down. So that's technically cheating. And he still lost that day, which is what the result of the 63-point game was. So that's some footage. I guess, I don't know if we've seen that before, but that's the type of footage you're talking about. Some of the footage I loved was when they won the game, the preseason game in France, and he's like kind of trolling a little bit, and he's joking around. Give it to Phil. Don't let Jerry get it. Like, that was the footage right there. That was so money, because the camera's following him in there, and you get that genuine moment of Michael Jordan just like clearly is still bugged by this guy. And we had never seen that before, that and the Oakley stuff.
I will say too, though, I think Jordan, when he said, like, I'm really worried that people are going to think I'm an asshole after this, I wonder how much of that was like him really honestly not being on social media at all. And so not understanding like the current environment. You saw it on Twitter now. Everybody's like, God, Jerry Krause, what a tool. People were comparing Jerry Krause to Carol Baskins from the Tiger King documentary. Like, Jerry Krause died. He's dead. He can't speak for himself, and yet he's still getting dunked on by all of Twitter in 2020 during a pandemic. Like, what a way for Jerry's legacy to continue on here. But I think that's actually notable, is like, I don't think Jordan's going to catch it unless there's actual footage of him tearing down people that are going to be perceived as innocent, because Jerry Krause isn't. He's seen as like your typical management dude that thinks he knows more than he does.
Yeah, I saw a lot of Mr. Swackhammer comparisons to Krause and Space Jam. That was funny. I love the little footage of MJ pulling up in his Lambo or whatever, and just like parking it just randomly out in the parking lot, and not giving any cares that it's not in a space, and just casually walking to the practice facility. I just love like little bits like that kind of show the insight into, the true kind of MJ behind the scenes. Yeah,
that's what I want more of. I want more MJ's an asshole, and MJ acting like, Rob, you make a really good point. Like the way he shimmied in the locker room, like he was genuinely giddy in that moment. Like, you never see Michael Jordan laugh just joyfully ever, right? You only see him laugh like when he's gotten over on somebody, or when they've won a title and he's smiling with relief because he can probably finally breathe again. But like, that
was at Jerry's expense too, getting that genuine moment from Jordan,
which also proves what an asshole he is.
Exactly. That's the best part of that chuckle, was like he knew he was trolling, and that humored his airness. That humors his airness.
Yes.
So, I had never seen him chuckle like that. We've seen the whole like, oh, that's a good joke, or the crying Jordan meme speech that he did at Kobe's procession. Like, we've seen that version of Jordan, but not the "you caught me in the act" trolling Jordan, which I think we'll get a lot more of.
You know what? You're right. And maybe I'm being too critical, because there were 3 genuine Jordan candid laughing moments. One was listening to his mom read the letter. Number 2 was the traveling cocaine circus, which genuinely was like, you never would have gotten that from Jordan in the middle of his playing days. And 3 was Jordan, sort of the giddy, shimmy Jordan. All of that, like that to me, like that's all I want from this. Like, I just want to see that 24/7. I want vicious, giddy, laughing Jordan. That's it.
And I think we'll appreciate it more, because like it's been an urban legend. And I think honestly now we're much more okay with the idea of athletes being imperfect and celebrating athletes for those imperfections, unless they're LeBron. I think that in most cases, like we're a little bit more receptive to those ideas. So like, I think that's what people really do want to see, because like everyone knows he was like that. Like, that's the reputation that preceded him. A lot of the stories that have been told so far in the documentary are stuff that was in print and were out there. But like Wob said, like they just weren't like directly part of the public consciousness. And I think that the reception for that stuff of him being like that will be probably a lot better than it would have been at any other previous time in history.
things that I think we need to think about as we go forward in this, and I want to get everyone's closing points here. Number one, I am dying to know if the glass of scotch that is sitting on that side table when he's being interviewed, is it just going to get lower and lower as the documentary goes on? Wob, you're shaking your head. You already know.
Because it's Cincoro tequila is what it is.
Oh, what if it's the tequila? Is it the tequila? Is that going to be less and less as the interview goes on over the next 10 and 8 episodes? Number one. Number two, is that Jordan's house? Because I feel like you could play basketball in that foyer, which is just insane. Number three, what do we think? Let's set an over-under here on what we think the total audience, total viewership is going to be on this documentary. And then I want everyone's closing points. Matt, you can go first.
Okay, so I think somebody already mentioned that the glass was already refilled like halfway through the documentary. So I think probably like, and it was like that assumes that they were shot sequentially, but I will assume that Jordan had several drinks, and that's probably going to lead to his emotional reactions that apparently he had talking about some of the stuff in later episodes. I will take. I don't know how to put it into a number for millions of viewers because I can't keep those numbers straight. I will say it will have had more viewers than any NBA Finals game since Jordan retired. And my biggest like closing thing is just sweet mother of God. Jordan was fucking great at basketball. Just like the one-handed off balance runner shot that nobody ever seems to talk about, like that little.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never been able to figure out how he does that one. Like the reverses, the up and unders, I've seen guys do, right? The pull-ups, the fadeaways, I've seen guys do those. The stuff he used to do in his young days where he's off balance, leaning sideways, falling down, pushing it, and it's all controlled. I have no concept for how he was able to do the things that he did. He is the greatest basketball player of all time.
In viewership, so an average NBA Finals gets like, I think like 20 million viewers, somewhere around that range, right? 20 and a half, I think was last year. Wob,
Yeah, this is not going to beat the NBA. If 20 million people watch the NBA Finals, this ain't beating it. Sorry.
Nobody has anything else to do.
This ain't beating it. This will do 7 at the most.
I'll take the over on 7.
I was actually thinking about 6.
Well,
so.
Time out. Are we combining ESPN and ESPN2? Because that's what, the number they're going to put out is combining both.
Yeah, it's got to be.
Yes.
It's going to be total viewership.
Total viewership.
Yeah, I'll stick to
think
7.
About whatever they're taking from the app, whatever it's going to be.
Price is right. This you can't go over, otherwise you lose.
I went over. I lost. I'm fine with that.
Okay. So, I'm at 7. Which is gargantuan, by the way.
Yeah, I personally I was thinking 6.5.
Okay. I think I'm with Matt. People don't have a lot to do, man, and the build.
Nothing else to do.
This build-up has been crazy to this. I think I wouldn't be surprised if it pushes, 8, 9, 10. I'll just throw that out.
You got to pick one. You can't. When you bet, you can't say I'll take 4, 5, or 6.
I took over on 7, which 8, 9, and 10 qualifies.
I'll take the over on 7 as well.
All right. Closing points for you, Justin Fan.
I mean, I just thought it was really well done, worth the wait, and I can't wait to see. We have 8 more parts of this. Just like I can't wait to see the level of detail that went into the first and second parts. And really, like we talked about in the intro, the number of things I didn't know, and Jordan has been covered to death, and just the things that he unearthed, the depth that they went into, the number of people that were interviewed. I was just extremely impressed at how well done it was. And I know how I'm going to be spending my next 4 Sundays.
Fire away, Wob.
It's a great start. In terms of best documentaries of all time, we think of the O.J. Simpson, we think of the Dream Team, we think there's if we sat here for 15 minutes, we could probably come up with a Mount Rushmore. For this to end up on that Mount Rushmore, it's going to come down to the climax, which is Jordan versus Byron Russell, Game 7. How they end it, how they put a bow on all of this, I think will ultimately determine like where it stands. But in terms of the first 20% of getting to that point was completed tonight. I would love to see them continue to build out the storylines for the players like they're doing. I understand the feedback from some people are upset because it felt disjointed because they're going back in time and they're fast forwarding. They're doing that on purpose here because they're trying to tell you the story of the players, and to do so, they have to go back in time and how they got to that point. So I stick with it. I hope it'll be more mainstream, the style of the production. I love the uniqueness of it. I love that it's different. It's telling a different little bit of a story that everyone already knows and knows the results to. That's the hardest part of documentaries, especially ones that people know what happens, is how do you tell it in a unique way? And tell you, Chad, they did a great job of that tonight.
The one thing we didn't talk about is Michael Jordan hurt his head banging it on the backboard in college while making a block. Of all the highlights that they showed tonight, that one might have been the most remarkable. And I guarantee we're going to get 5 things that top it over the next 4 weeks. All right, folks. Wob, Justin Fan, Matt Moore, thanks for doing the show. Talk to you guys later.